Hi everyone, so welcome back to If We Were Giants. I will be reading chapter 24 today. The chapter is a little bit long, so this video will be a bit longer, but I am sure that it will really be wonderful. And if you hear little jingles and stuff, I have my new pet kitten. So he's kind of sitting in his little tree next to me and he's just watching over things, so he jingles every once in a while. So the next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Where once the forest had seemed eerily deserted, it was now teeming with people. Everyone was out of their homes, even in the pouring rain, no longer feeling uncomfortable about being out in the open. It was a prolonged period of trial, followed by a whole lot of error. For every step the community took forward, it seemed like they already took two lurching, shambling steps backward, literally, because making the giants turned out to be a lot more difficult than it seemed. Tia could rig up the logs to make them stomp in place, as their first giant had done when it scared the small group of hunters. But making these stomps across some distance was a different story altogether. One soggy afternoon, Kira sat on a great stump with Tiha, Luan, and Makina, watching the two different groups of builders test out their designs. Makina pointed. They look so weird without the rest of their bodies. Kira nodded. The girl had a point. The 12-foot-high wooden legs ended suddenly at the waist in midair. It was a little creepy. Group 1, take your places. Tiha's voice, timid in the conversation, was strong and clear when she was giving directions. 6 tree folk, 4 men and 2 women, scaled the logs that made up the legs, hands grabbing levers and feet positioned on pedals. Ready? Tiha called. The woman at the top of the contraption was quick to give a thumbs up. Go. The legs took 3 tiny stuttering steps, followed by 1 long lunge. Then they twisted in a patch of mud and promptly toppled over. The tree folk all jumped out, keeping clear of the falling logs, but landing squarely in the muck. Everyone okay? Kira yelled. The tree folk picked themselves off the ground, filthy and sheepish, but unhurt. That looks like my little sister trying to walk, Makina whispered. She's 1.5 years old. Luan giggled, and Kira slapped him to keep him quiet. Ready? Group 2? Another thumbs up, but this one perhaps a little less enthusiastic. Go. One leg stayed firmly planted in place while the others stepped frantically, winding in a furious circle. Eventually, both tilted and crashed on the ground, where the one mobile leg kept kicking in the air. That looks like my dad, after he has had one too many cups of strong mead, Luan said. Now it was Makina's turn to giggle. Kira slapped at them both, but they quickly stopped over when they saw Tiha's reaction. The girl groaned, cradling her head in both hands while she stared down at the fallen legs. I've tried everything, she muttered, shaking her head back and forth in frustration. I don't know how to fix it. She was clearly talking to herself, but Kira put a soothing hand on her shoulder and responded, You'll get it. We still have more time. Kira said this as much to calm her own nerves as to comfort a friend. Each rainy day was a blessing for them, but she knew the wet season would not last forever. Excuse me? Tiha and Kira looked up to see a young man approaching the stump. Well, you know more about this than me, of course, but I might be able to help? I mean, maybe just this one thing? Tiha lifted her head out of her hands and studied him. How so? He turned and waved for them to follow. It will be easier if I show you. His name was Suban, and his home tree was quite a distance away. When they got close, he stepped off a trail and pushed aside a group of hanging creepers that had been concealing the ladder to his front door. This feels so different. Suban held the vines aside and motioned for them to climb the ladder. We usually do everything that we can to hide our place. I'm not used to showing people right where it is. Maybe things are changing, Kira gave him a smile. Could be a whole new day for the tree folk. Subban smiled back, and Kira felt shy all of a sudden. Well, maybe I don't mind those changes, he said. Tiha rolled her eyes. Hurry up and show us why you brought us here. As usual, she was all business. They climbed up to the porch that wrapped around his house. So, I have a little sister, okay? And she's always waking me up in the middle of the night to get her some water. And if our gourd is empty, I have to climb all the way back down to the pond and fill a cup for her. By the time I get back, I am so wide awake that I can't get back to sleep. Aw, that's too sweet of you, Kira said. Tiha grunted. Get on with the story. Subban reached through an open window and brought out an upside-down wooden cup with rope tied around it. So I rigged this up. He pulled on the rope in a hand-over-hand gesture. The rope was connected to round wooden pulleys that were fastened to the tree trunk at different points. As Subban tugged on the rope, Tiha and Kira watched as the cup traveled down to the road, dip into the spring, and flip right side up. Then he hauled it right back up to where they were standing. Subban grabbed the cup and took a long drink. See? It's easy. She can do it by herself, and I need to stay asleep. Tiha studied the system of pulleys carefully, not saying anything. Wow, Kira said, smiling at Subban again. Thanks so much for showing us this. It's a really clever way to... Let's go. Tiha grabbed Kira by the elbow and pulled her roughly to the ladder. Subban stuck his face over the ledge of the platform as they descended. Maybe you can come back sometime? The look on his face was so hopeful. Oh, sure, Tiha said, right after the looming life or death battle. Kira shrugged and gave him a wave. 2 days later, Tiha had rigged up a system that connected ankle, knee, and waist with round pulleys, and the giant puppets were walking smoothly. And then she was on to the next challenge, much to her chagrin. I am stumbling everywhere. Much to her chagrin, Tiha had become the most popular person in the community. People sought her out at all times of the day, asking for guidance about engineering and construction, but also bringing ideas and gadgets from their own homes, as Subban had done. It turned out that the tree folk had a lot of good ideas when they were able to pull them together like this. Kira was proud of the way her friend handled the attention. Tiha was very professional, not exactly warm, but she always studied each new design carefully and patiently answered each question and took the time to demonstrate this or that bit of mechanics with the smaller scale puppets her brothers had made. In fact, she had taught some people so well that they were able to go back and lead the building process in their section of the woods. One morning, during a rare stretch of time where Tiha wasn't being bothered with requests, she approached Kira at the edge of the forest, where Luan had set up their base of operations. She had brought one of the smaller puppets along. Can I show you something? Tiha asked. Of course. Kira pushed herself off the ground and dusted herself off. What is it? Do you remember when Mozan said that the trees are the real giants? Back when we were showing the first one to you. Kira nodded. Well, that got me thinking about something. She propped the puppet against the nearby trunk. When we built the first giant, I designed it to be operated by just 5 people, because it was only going to be our little group that was using it. But now, there are so many volunteers, and we have more people in each one. I bet we could put 12 people into each giant puppet and still make our army. Kira tilted her head and studied the puppet. So does that mean you want to make them bigger? Yes, we could do that, Tiha nodded. But it also means that we need to make them do more. And the design could be different. Better. Here, I'll show you. She started to disassemble the puppet. With the first giant, there were a few moving parts, because 5 of us had to move everything, right? She lifted up various pieces she had just unattached. But if we have more people operating each one, then we can have smaller moving parts with each person responsible for their own segment. Kira wished that her mind worked more like Tiha's, but it just didn't. I hear what you are saying, but I don't know how that helps us. Here, let me try to demonstrate, Tiha said. Kira was grateful for her patience. Tiha moved over to a sapling. Okay, pretend this is a big tree. She took all of the little pieces of puppet and placed them in and around the tree. Some she rested on top of branches, running parallel so they ended up just looking like a thicker limb. Others she wedged in the crook of 2 branches, hidden behind a screen of leaves. And others she laid on the ground out at the base of the trunk as if they were dead branches or fallen logs. She stepped back to look over what she had just done and raised her eyebrows in a question at Kira. Does that look like a giant to you? Kira shook her head. Of course not. It just looks like a tree. Exactly. But if there's someone in charge of each piece hiding in the branches, and they had all practiced to coordinate their movements with the whole group, Tiha grabbed the individual pieces and quickly reassembled them into a puppet. All of a sudden, there is a giant tree. Or all of a sudden, there is a giant there. Kira finally got it. And that way, we could hide our numbers. Exactly. Tiha gave her a rare smile. The takers could enter what they think is an empty forest, and suddenly they be surrounded by giants. You are amazing. Kira slowly shook her head in wonder. Simply amazing. I am so glad you're on our side. Tiha ducked her head and picked up the puppet. Even with all of the positive attention, she still hadn't gotten used to taking compliments. I should get back to Luan and the others. I want to test this out. She scurried away and disappeared into the forest. Kira stretched and sat down on the grass of the meadow. She deserved a 5-minute break. She had worked harder these last several weeks than she ever had in her life. And as she was sitting there, a woman and several children walked by. They were carrying pots of food that smelled delicious and baskets full of bread. The little group stopped right in front of Kira. Would you like something to eat? Kira leaned forward and peered into the pot. Freshly grilled crocodile steaks. Yes, I would love some. The woman smiled and fished out 3 strips of meat, while one of her daughters broke off a hunk of bread. It was still warm from the oven. Oh, by the gods, this is the best thing I've eaten in a long time. This was no false praise. Not only was the meat skillfully prepared, but Kira's entire family had been so busy each day that they have hardly had time to wolf down leftovers at night before they fell into their hammocks. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be able to serve you. Kira wrinkled her brow. Did someone tell you to do this? The person in charge of your construction group, perhaps? The woman motioned to her children to walk out on without her for a moment. When they left, she turned back to Kira and shook her head. No, nothing like that. I'm afraid I'm no good at building, and besides, I need to look after my little ones during the day. But I still wanted to help, you know. I wanted to do my part. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. When I saw you speak in the clearing that day, I knew we would be staying to protect the forest. Like I said, I have no business building or fighting, but I know I can cook. You certainly can. Anyway, I should be going. There are so many people to feed. Thanks again. Kira watched as the woman went down from group to group throughout the clearing. The people at each workstation delighted to take a break from their labor and get an unexpected treat in the bargain. Over the next several weeks, Kira regularly saw this woman bringing food to people throughout the clearing, and her example inspired others. Wherever Kira roamed through the forest, checking on construction sites and trying to encourage the workers, she saw more and more people serving food to their fellow tree folk, and she heard the appreciative comments ring out. How did you get the meat so juicy? What kind of seasoning did you use? Do you think I could stop by your hut sometimes and you can show me how you set up your cook fire? My meals never turn out like this. One day, as she sat in the clearing enjoying a kebab of freshly grilled boar and mushrooms that had been given to her by a man wandering around with a cart full of them, Kira realized that this was much bigger than food. These people were meeting others whom they would have never approached before. They were sharing, connecting. She almost felt like she was back in Cedu again. After nearly 4 months of nonstop toil, Kira noticed that the rainstorms had started to abate. The river was still raging, but the dry season was at hand. She was lying out on the platform surrounding the hut, her muscles tired and sore, when Luan climbed onto the wooden boards and collapsed beside her. They were quiet for a few moments before he said, "It feels different, doesn't it?" She tilted her head and studied him. "What does?" Luan reached up and motioned to the surrounding forest. "Things are drying out. Rainy season will be over soon." She nodded. "Yes." "Well, that's usually such a happy time, right? Hopeful. Everyone's dreaming about warm weather and not having to wring their soggy clothes when you get home every night, and not having to slog through the mud to get anywhere. It's always the best part of the year." Kira nodded and sighed, "But not this time. It's all mixed up with dread." Luan rubbed his stomach. "It's like a cold ball sitting right there. Won't ever really go away." Kira thought about that. She had been living with her own dread for so long, trying to keep all of those memories pushed away, that she supposed she hadn't noticed as much as the others. Now that she had finally let go and told the truth to herself and everyone else, she was feeling much better, relieved, even with the upcoming battle looming before her. After that, Luan was quiet for so long that she had thought he had fallen asleep. Kira couldn't blame him. He'd been working harder than anybody on their puppet, and at the end of each day he would go off by himself and come home late. She was usually asleep when he got back to the hut, or simply too tired to remember to ask him where he had been. Probably helping some other construction groups, teaching them how to work together to maneuver the giants. Finally, he turned to her and whispered, "You know what I keep thinking?" "What?" "It's a good thing I pulled you out of the river that day a long time ago." Kira got up on her elbows. The memory of that time was still painful, and it didn't help that Luan still thought about it too. Would she ever be more than a pathetic orphan in his eyes? "I'm very grateful to you, Luan. You know that." He waved her words away. "If I hadn't, none of this would be happening. We wouldn't all be working together. We wouldn't stand a chance against these intruders." Kira searched his face for any hint of sarcasm or teasing, but he looked dead serious. "They don't know about that," she said. "The tree folk still have you and your friends, like Tiha. She is amazing. The other day I am not talking about Tiha," he said. "I am talking about you. You're amazing too, Kira. You have so much strength." Her face flushed. She almost laughed. He had seen her at her absolute weakest moments. "Thanks, Luan. I do think it's been good for me to remember and talk about before. You're an incredibly brave person," he said. "That day you ran into the Takers' camp to rescue me, and that time you spoke in front of everyone. I couldn't have done those things." Kira was taken aback. He was still the bravest person she knew. Foolhardy sometimes, but still. She recovered quickly. "That's not true. You've always never been one to shy away from danger." He smiled at that. "And it takes a lot of courage to be a good hook hunter," she went on, "like you're going to be." She poked him in the ribs, and he squirmed out of reach, laughing. They lay still for a few minutes after that, until Luan said, "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Do you think we're ready? I mean, really ready?" Kira took some more time to ponder her answer, the way Mome always did for her. It was an important question and deserved a thoughtful response. "Honestly, I don't think we'll know what until it happens. How can you really prepare for something like this? We don't know how many of them will show up, and we don't know about the tree folk will respond in that moment." Kira shuddered as she recalled her terrifying experiences with the two Taker camps. Luan had called her brave, but she definitely hadn't felt that way either time. It was so easy to give in to panic and so difficult to keep your mind and body focused while everything was crashing down around you. Practice is one thing, but being in the middle of a dangerous situation is another. That's not very comforting, Luan said, but it's fair. She reached over and took his hand, squeezing it. Whatever happens, I am glad I'm doing this with you, your family, and your friends. Thank you for everything you've done for me. You've got it, sis. We're in this together. He squeezed her hand back. And whatever happens, I don't think we're going to have to wait much longer to find out. All right, I'll see you for chapter 25.